let's see here. All right, so there's only so much power to go around. We've talked about that, right? Right?
Yeah.
One pie of government power. Okay? And we've talked about how that power is distributed between the national and state governments, right? Okay, so the first place that the power is separated, I'm answering the last question on your study journals. Just so you know, because you always question me after I'm done and you say I didn't answer that, and I say, no, yes I did. All right, so where is the power separated? That's a good question to ask. Three different places in our government system that the power is separated. What is the purpose of separating the power? I guess that I'm not going to write that up there, but what is the purpose of separating the power?
So that not one branch gets more powerful than the next.
Not just branches.
Or person.
Okay, yeah, we don't want any group of people or single person to have too much power. Remember, we tried that before, didn't we? With the unitary system under who? When we were under King George and Great Britain, right? We had that. Didn't work, did it? All right, and then we gave too much of the power to the states under the Articles. That didn't work. So we had to, and we wanted to make sure that the power was separated. Number one, to keep somebody, any group of people or single person from getting too powerful. And also we had to make sure after the Articles failed, we had to make sure that the national government was strong enough, right? So we had to make sure that both the states and the national government had enough power. So these guys, 1787, when they wrote the Constitution, came up with the first place. It's worked, hasn't it? Because it's the oldest Constitution, the oldest government in the world. All right? So they created what type of a government then? A federal government, right? Which means what? Yeah, between
The national government.
the national government and the states. So, over here, I'm going to do a 3D pie today.
What is that? Is that
Yay.
half a heart? It's half a... Oh, is that a heart for Valentine's Day?
It's a pie.
Broke it.
Oh, it's really nice that you're celebrating Valentine's Day in the notes.
Pie.
Valentine's Day?
Valentine's pie.
Look, it's like...
Okay, so there's two halves of a single pie, of the pie of power. All right? The pie of power. Not rhubarb. Power. Rhubarb? Have you ever had rhubarb pie?
Yeah.
Horrible.
Oh, it's delicious.
No, it is
Pretty
not.
Put some strawberries with the rhubarb. That's my favorite.
I will
So,
seriously.
anybody wants to make me a strawberry rhubarb pie? It's really good when it's cold, out of the fridge. Perfect. Okay, so this isn't strawberry rhubarb. This is the pie of power. All right, power. See, now it's the pie of power because I wrote power on the board. Okay, so now it's the pie of power, separated pretty equally, right? That side looks a little bigger, but it's pretty close. Between who then? In our government, in the federal system. Yeah, the national government and our state governments. Okay? See how this all ties into what we've been learning about yesterday and the day before? Federalism. Okay, so the purpose of that was to limit the power of the national government, but also to make sure it had enough power, right? And then the states have some of the power to make sure that neither one of them gets too strong. So there's the first place the power is separated. Now what your assignment focused on yesterday was the next part, which was the national government. And each of the states is also set up this way. All right? So how is the national government, how is the power separated there? How many pieces of the pie are there? There are 3 pieces of pie.
Oh, jeez.
No, it's not.
Wait, why didn't?
I don't know, you do really good today.
Alright. I'm a failed architecture student. Not messing with you. I am. I'm a
Really?
failed architecture student. I learned I didn't like it. I hated it. I hated architecture. So I left. I didn't want to do something with my life that I didn't really want to. I hated it. Right? Why would you do that? Right?
What made you think government?
Yes, I love teaching government. I get to talk about pie every day instead of load stuff and do physics and crap. I don't want to do that. That's not fun. All right, so this is the national government's half of the pie right here. It's separated into three pretty equal parts of the pie, right? So their half of the pie is separated into three pretty equal parts of the pie. And they belong to who? What are the three branches?
Judicial.
Executive. Actually, I'm gonna go in order. I'm gonna go in order here. Legislative, executive, and judicial. And the reason I went in that order is because that's the order that the Constitution has them in. Okay? So, three separate parts and equal parts, right? Separate and co-equal. Separate and co-equal. Alright? So that means that they each have different powers. And do they have to worry about the other two branches? And really, are they connected physically in any way? No. They each have their little thing, their little part that they do. Alright? The legislative branch, what do? They make the law. Executive branch enforces the law. And the judicial branch interprets the law. Okay? So that's how the power is just technically separated in the national government. Each of the branches has their own thing that they do. And if the Constitution doesn't say they can do it, can they do it? Not technically, right? Sort of. Goes back to that whole sort of thing. But not technically, they're not supposed to be able to. Okay. The states are the same way. I'm not going to do 3D. I'm going to do it like this. There, yeah, that's true.
We make 3D.
You haven't erased it right there.
It's about the middle. Is that about the middle?
Uh-huh.
Is that about a third?
Uh-huh.
Is that about a third?
Uh-huh.
Alright. So, same thing. Legislative, executive, judicial.
Goodness.
Alright? So every state has these three branches. Following?
Yep.
Alright. What parts of the Constitution, this is kind of your easy question, which part of the Constitution declares what how much power is in this piece of the pie for the legislative branch? Article 1. Article Roman numeral I, right? Roman numeral I. I means 1 in Roman numerals. So, Article 1 of the Constitution tells Congress what they can do. Alright? Article 2 tells the executive branch, which is who? The President, what he can do. And then Article 3 gives the judicial branch their power. Kind of. That's a story for another day. Judicial review. You guys will get into that soon enough. Is that next? That might be next. No, that's after checks and balances. You're introduced to it in the next assignment. Alright, so separate, co-equal parts. That's the point. And each of them does something completely different. Now compare that to what we talked about with the parliamentary system. Let's bring that back up. The parliamentary form of government. how would this be different under the parliamentary form of government? So remember, what is parliamentary form of government? What's that mean? Yeah, the legislative branch would choose the executive branch. Okay, so would these two parts right here be completely separate from each other? No, you could connect them pretty closely, right? So they would still have their own jobs, but they wouldn't be completely separate from each other. All right, so something to keep in mind, because parliamentary system is always going to come up pretty much on every test we have in here. All right, so that's the second place. Why did the framers, the guys that wrote the Constitution, do this? Think about the Articles. Remember the Articles. Why? What was one of the reasons that the Articles failed? Okay, but why didn't it have any power? Remember, how many branches of government were there? One branch of government under the Articles, right? You guys remember that? Bring that back, bring the Articles forward to the front a little bit here again. Okay, there's a reason they did all these things, because the Articles didn't work, right? So there was only one branch under the Articles. What was that branch? The legislative, which makes the law. There was no enforcer. I've talked about that. If there's a rule, like I said with cell phones, the rule's out there, the legislative branch has made it, the school board has made that rule, but if the principal doesn't make the teachers enforce it, does it matter? No, not at all, right? And that was one of the biggest problems under the Articles. So, the framers of the Constitution recognized that, and they said, okay, we're going to have somebody that enforces the rules. And to make sure that both of these guys follow the rule book, which is the Constitution, we're going to put the judicial branch, the Supreme Court, in place. So what the Supreme Court does is decide whether what these two other branches are doing follows the Constitution, follows the rules that are given to them. Okay? That's what I mean by interpret. They're making sure that these other two branches are doing their jobs and following the rule book. All right? One more place that you'll find separation of powers, and this is one of your test essay questions. You have to give me all these different places. So here's number 2, separation of power. It's with the 3 branches. Federalism is the first place, dividing the power between the national government and the states. The 3 branches, dividing that power of the national government into 3 more parts. And then finally, where's the last place? If you look at these pieces of the pie, where else? What? Somebody said? No. And the national government side. On the national government side. Down here. Which of these is split? Yes. Okay, the legislative branch then. Their piece of the pie. Is split into 2 more separate, pretty much co-equal parts, isn't it? Remember what's this called when you have 2 houses in Congress or the legislative branch? A bicameral legislature. So that would be the 3rd part to this answer. So our national government is split at the very top, or the power of our government is split at the very top between the national government, the federal government, and the states. The national government is split by into the 3 branches, and then our legislative branch, their piece of the pie is a bicameral legislature, which means 2 houses, right? What are the names of those 2 houses? Okay. Senate and the House of Representatives. All right, so then notice how small these pieces of the pie are. All right, now what has to happen for anything to be turned into a law? They make the law, right? So what has to happen at this level with these two pieces of the pie before it makes it anywhere else? Yeah, they both have to agree. And they both have to pass, and we'll get into the lawmaking process down the road. But these guys check each other. They make sure that every bill that gets passed has to be passed with the exact same wording, punctuation, grammar, spelling, through both houses. If anything is different, then it doesn't make it through the legislative branch. If an and is in, if they switch an and with an or, it has to completely start over. All right? So these guys have to at some point, and girls have to at some point, come together and collaborate, talk out their issues if they want this bill to be turned into, these things to be turned into laws. All right? But this ranks, so that makes and ensures that these two houses have limited power as well. That keeps this from turning into an oligarchy, right, with a small group of people. You don't want the House or the Senate to just take over all the power in the government. So that was the purpose there. Okay? So those are the three places right there where they are separated. Where the power of the national government is separated. The states, remember we've already kind of discussed this, their power is separated into the three branches in all 50 states. Does every state have a bicameral legislature though? No, all but two, right? So keep that Nebraska and Maine. Is that the other one? I think it's Nebraska and Maine. Maybe it's just Nebraska. No, it is 49. I think it is just Nebraska. I don't know. Somebody look it up later and tell me. All right, so all but one or two states, I think it's just one, has this exact same system in place. All right? This is the basics of it. Any questions on separation of powers? Did I get everything on there? Oh, I didn't talk about the court packing thing. Okay, so that's the basics behind separation of powers. Now let's apply that to a historical issue. I don't know how to do this. What do you think, a dotted line? It's perfect. A dotted arc. Right? Not a line, I guess. Does a line have to be straight? No. Are lines straight?
No.
What are those called? What are straight lines called in math? Segments, but it's still, is it a line?
A line can be.
Is a line straight?
As long as another.
It's still called a line.
Well,
I don't know. What's a straight line? Because this is an arc.
Straight line's a straight line.
Just a straight line and an arc?
Yeah.
So,
The curved line.
curved line, straight lines. See, this isn't technically math terms though, so I don't know. I feel like I'm wrong. I feel like I'm letting you all down using the wrong language and stuff for math. So, okay, let's talk about this historical issue. Who is FDR? A president, okay, we got that part. What else? Let's start with his name. Franklin Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Okay, kind of a big deal. Couple things that he helped to navigate our country through. Two big things. One, it was the Great Depression. All right, and that's where this picks up. Where your story for today picks up was during the Great Depression. His plan to fix the Great Depression, what was it called? The New Deal. All right. The other thing that he navigated us through, kind of a big deal, was the Second World War, right? World War II. All right. He was elected 4 times, served 3.5 of them, died in office, well-liked, very popular, okay? All those things. 2 major things that he did that most historians look at him and say, okay, he really messed up on these. One of them was the internment of Japanese Americans during the war, during World War II. We'll look at that another day, okay? Korematsu, we'll look at Korematsu versus Arizona, that awesome Supreme Court case. The other one was this right here that you were supposed to read about. The court packing issue. What does it mean to court pack?
The president tries to get a whole bunch of justices
And how would he do that?
by changing the law.
Yeah, changing the Constitution to add seats. The Constitution says how many people are on the Supreme Court?
9.
Nine on the Supreme Court, constitutionally, okay? So, there are nine seats on the Supreme Court. I don't know, I'm not gonna write that down. Okay, something you'll need to know, something you should know from here to this point forward. Okay, but court packing would be changing the Constitution to add seats to the Supreme Court. FDR tried to push that through. He failed, obviously, because there's still 9. But, why? Let's go back. In the New Deal, we're trying to fix the Great Depression, right? So, what FDR and the Democrats are trying to do is pass new laws to fix the problems of the Depression. Following? What keeps happening, though, as they pass those new laws, these guys over here, the judicial branch, keep using their power, which is called judicial review, to tell these guys that they aren't following the rules. All right? So they are ruling pretty much a lot of the laws that are passed in the New Deal unconstitutional. When the judicial or when the Supreme Court rules something unconstitutional, it goes bye-bye. Following? Okay, so these two branches are passing laws all over the place. A bunch of them get stricken down by the Supreme Court. Now, this is the reason why FDR wanted to add these seats. Yeah, a lot of them are older from the Republican Party, from the previous regimes. Who chooses, let's go here too, who chooses the Supreme Court justices? Yeah, the president does. So, if they get the Constitution changed to add seats, and he wanted to add 6 to get it up to 15, who would get to choose those new seats? He would, right? And who's he going to choose? Yeah, people that are going to help him out. Which then, how does that cause a problem here? Exactly. You see the executive branch and the judicial branch then being tied together too much. So that's the argument against that. Basically, FDR was trying to set up the government in his own way so that he could so he and the Congress could do whatever they needed to do to fix the Great Depression. Okay? So that's the whole story there. Now, why did I put that in with the separation of powers stuff? Kind of tied all that together then. Yeah, it was going to tie these things together. So it is a historical example of a time when this could have been decreased, when this separation of power could have been decreased. Okay? The only way to change that would be to change the Constitution. And to change the Constitution, it's very difficult. You have to have 2/3 of both houses of Congress say yes, and then you have to have 3/4 of the states say yes. So it's really difficult to get that done. It didn't pass because you had that big political argument about how that would make the president, in this case, too strong. And then also one thing about the Supreme Court, too. How long do they serve?
Forever
until they decide they're done or break the law, one or the other. All right? So then how long would these 6 people that he puts on there last?
Forever.
Until they decide they're done. So it could have an impact over 40 years. Okay? So basically they said, we don't need these extra seats added. Because we don't want these 2 branches to be tied together like